Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
Okay, so we're good. Well, Commissioner Capps, thanks so much for being here. Why don't we start with an intro about you, who you are, and what you do for the county?
Great. It's a privilege to be with you here today, Josh. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm Blake Capps, and I am the new Martin County Commissioner for District 3. District 3 is the southern part of Martin County, and it includes Hobe Sound and Jupiter Island, as well as Indiantown, and the northern part of Tequesta down by County Line Road, that portion of northern Tequesta that is in Martin County. So that's my district. You know, though we represent districts, we run for office county-wide. So I had to run in the entire county, but you sort of take your district under your wing when you become a commissioner, and you have to live in your district. So that's the way the districts work. There are 5 districts and 5 commissioners. And we moved to Hobe Sound when I was 13, about 48 years ago, because I'm 61 now. And met my wife here. We raised 3 kids in this community, all of whom still live right here close to us in Hobe Sound, along with my son-in-law. We have a family business here in Martin County, Capps Roofing, which we have had for 32 years. So everything we hold close is right here in Martin County. So it's a great privilege to serve on the Board of County Commissioners and to have a role in the county government.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before the recording about Hobe Sound and really Martin County in general, what it's looked like in the last decades and the way that it's grown in different ways. And so I'm interested to hear from your point of view, what made you want to run for office? I mean, obviously you have deep roots here. And like you said, you raised a family here. Your family now lives here. We're in a similar position where we've got a few generations now that I have children who are here in Martin County. And so I do respect your desire to serve. What made you want to take that step?
Great. My interest in county government was really advanced by my participation on 4 county boards prior to becoming a county commissioner. I started on the Hobe Sound Neighborhood Advisory Committee about 5 years ago or so. And that led me to serving on the Community Redevelopment Agency Board. And then I got on to the Metropolitan Planning Organization Board, and then I got on the Local Planning Agency. So I got quite immersed in county affairs before deciding to run, and this was just sort of the next step in the process, I guess. So it's a great
I can see that. Yeah. I could see how you kind of get your feet wet, and I'm sure there's other people, colleagues and stuff, who kind of push you along as well. Who are, hey, look, just this is probably a good idea for you to try to run for this.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a great honor to be elected by the people of your community and to have a say and a role in setting the course for your own community. It's quite humbling to be in a role like that.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that you see going on now that you're most excited to be a part of? Developments or things that are going on now or that you would like to see put into place, either that were part of maybe your platform when you were running, or maybe they've kind of fallen in as you've gotten started in your position. Is there anything that sticks out?
Yeah. We can talk about various issues if you want, but I always like to begin these kinds of talks with explaining a little bit about how Martin County became different than other surrounding counties. And most people who live here have that awareness that our county is quite different than surrounding counties. And that is because of our comprehensive plan that was adopted in 1982. And there were some things put into place by some really smart people back then that kept us quite different. And I always like to explain and touch on just a few of those major distinctives, because oftentimes people don't really know why we're different than surrounding counties. But one of them is the 4-story height limit. You can only build 4 stories in Martin County. And a great visual of that is when you cross the 2 bridges over to Hutchinson Island, the Evans Prairie Bridge and the Ernest Lyons Bridge. And you get up on top of that second one and you look to the south at Sailfish Point. And all the buildings are just like 2 stories or less.
Right.
And then you look to the north which is the northern end of St. Lucie County, and you see that long string of high rises, 25 stories or more, and you have a real fresh awareness of what the 4-story height limit means and what it could mean if it were different in our county. Right. Like in other counties, they allow that, but we don't. And another one is, this is probably the most important one. It's called the Urban Services Boundary. And right up through the middle of the county, there's this jagged line that goes up through the middle, and it's the Urban Services Boundary. And the urban area is to the east, and the agricultural area is to the west. Probably the most distinguishing characteristic of our county is that most of our western lands are undeveloped. If you think about Palm Beach County, that has over 30 cities in it, the explosive growth in Palm Beach County all had to do with the proliferation of municipalities and city governments that popped up all through their western area. And really all we have out there is the village of Indiantown. So the reason is because we have this urban services boundary, and it says basically we're going to contain urban services to inside the urban services boundary on the eastern part of the county where most of the people live. And urban services would be things like city water and city sewer lines. And if you want to build a house in the western area of Martin County, outside the urban services boundary, in the agricultural area, you have to use well and septic out there. And because we don't allow urban services outside of the urban services boundary. And if you want to build a house in the agricultural area in the western part of the county, you have to build it. In most of those areas, there's a 20-acre lot rule. You have to build on 20 acres. There are a few exceptions. One of them is a thing called the secondary urban services boundary, which is a narrow strip of land in parts of the county, like western Palm City, where you have the primary urban services boundary, and then you have a buffer strip in between called the secondary urban services boundary, where we allow 5-acre lots and 2-acre lots for equestrian type folks and the kind of people that like living in western Palm City, for instance. But then further to the west of them, that moves you into the ag area that would require homes to be on 20 acres. And that has really reduced the demand for development in western Martin County because not that many people want a 20-acre yard. That's a lot of mowing. So
certainly, yeah.
That's another one of the big things about the Martin County Comprehensive Plan. I've got a couple others, but I thought I'd pause a minute and see if you had any thoughts.
No, I think I'm glad that we started there. That's a good start to kind of lay that foundation. I guess one is the urban services boundary. Is that movable or is that set within that original code?
Commissioners have the power to move it, and the comprehensive plan that we talked about earlier actually has a provision in it that says that once we meet residential capacity inside the urban services boundary, in fact, once we get within 15 years of residential capacity, we have to start planning for the movement of the urban services boundary because we have a legal obligation under Florida statutes to provide adequate housing for the population. So there's a provision in there that would require the movement of it one day, but our studies reveal that we don't need to do that for quite some time. We still have quite a bit of capacity inside the urban area for quite some time.
Okay, that's good to hear. Sometimes that is one of the words that I think people use. Maybe they don't have a total grasp on exactly what it is. I mean, they understand it maybe on a base level, but that's one of those things that you can see thrown out on like a social media post, and it gets taken and it gets ran with. So that's good to hear a little bit more clarification.
Right.
Yeah.
And one day that might be needed, and if it's needed, that would come before the Board of County Commissioners for a comprehensive plan amendment to move the urban services boundary. But we would not anticipate that being needful for quite some time.
Got it.
But a couple other big distinctives of the comp plan are no filling in of wetlands. In many counties, you're allowed to fill in wetlands and mitigate your wetlands, basically where the developer would fill in the wetland and pay a fee toward the purchase of wetlands somewhere else. And that's allowed in places like Palm Beach County and St. Lucie County, but it is not allowed in Martin County. You must preserve your wetlands. So if your parcel has wetlands on it, you have to build around the wetlands. And the reason for that is because the wetlands are the epicenter of the natural world. All the little bugs are in there, and that means little minnows and then little fish and alligators and foxes and raccoons, and they all feast off the wetlands, the birds, the wading birds. So it's a much more environmentally focused and very environmentally friendly policy to say you must keep your wetlands and build around them. So that's one of the big things in our comp plan. Another one is uplands preservation. Like if you have a lot of natural uplands on your property, like pine tree forest, palmetto forest, scrub oak, scrub pines.
Right.
You must save 25% of your native upland habitat when you build. You can't just scrape your lot bare and start all over again. We require you to maintain some of your upland land as well. So those are some of the big deals in the Martin County Comprehensive Plan.
Yeah, and you can tell, if you were to look at an aerial view of the map, you had brought up, Hutchinson Island, and then you brought up some of Palm Beach County. And you look at an aerial view of the map and you can kind of see where these lines are drawn, especially when it comes to development further west, as you had mentioned.
Right.
And we had talked before about how you'd wanted to talk about the half-cent tax and the conservation land. What are your thoughts on how that's going to be worked in? I know you said that I mean, it was just passed in November. So what are the plans with that coming up?
Well, the half-cent sales tax referendum called Martin Forever passed in November, overwhelmingly, I might add, by I think it
Yeah.
was 64% of the vote, which really reflects Martin County values, I think. And so we have put together a land acquisition committee made up of environmental groups, business groups. um, it's a great committee. They have met like once or twice thus far, and they are going to begin the process of selecting parcels that they think would be good for us to buy, parcels that are environmentally sensitive, that fall into four land classifications. One is called Loxalucy, which is like in western Hobe Sound. There are parcels that fall into that under that identification. And the idea with Loxalucy is to create like a super park between Jonathan Dickinson State Park south of Bridge Road and the Atlantic Ridge State Park north of Bridge Road by buying additional lands in western Hobe Sound, basically. So that's Loxalucy. Another big area that we're trying to target is called Palmar, which is out there by the Hungry Lands.
Right.
It's a vast area with a very interesting history where there are like thousands of people who bought little pieces of swampland way back in the 50s and 60s, and they're owned by these little parcels are owned by just hundreds and hundreds of people all over the country.
Right.
Because they were duped into thinking they were one day going to get to have their slice of paradise for like a couple of $100. And so it's quite a process trying to secure those properties, but it's really environmentally sensitive land. So we're going to be targeting Palmar. Now, third area is called the Natural Lands of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. And that's a federal initiative, basically to secure lands north of the Everglades that could be useful in helping to restore the Everglades. And in Martin County, we still have a bunch of land that can be used for that purpose. That they're called the natural lands. And Indian River Lagoon South component of the Everglades Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. Anyway, a lot of fancy words for basically some other areas out there that are really going to be helpful in helping to restore the Everglades all the way down to Florida Bay. So that's the third area. And then the last one is called Blue Ways. Blue Ways are like smaller parcels that are along the river and along the ocean that are environmental sensitive areas as well. And that's the fourth area that we'll be looking to target lands for purchase. But the half-cent sales tax is going to bring us about $22 million a year for 10 years. That's about $220 million. And then we're going to leverage that into a state conservation fund called Florida Forever, and hopefully get that much again from the state, if not 2 times that much. There could be anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion that is going to go into this. So the conservation map of Martin County is getting ready to change significantly. And we're going to be able to secure a lot of natural lands and environmentally sensitive lands for generations to come. It's going to be a very exciting time to be a county commissioner.
That is exciting. I mean, in a lot of those areas, the first two, I mean, especially Palomar, I think was the second one you had mentioned. I'm slightly familiar with, and those seem like really good areas to be targeting, where it's kind of a win-win, where you get the
Mhm.
environmentally sensitive, and there's I, the people that I know some people who do have plots there where it's kind of like,
Mhm.
what do you have a deed to it, but you're not. I mean, what are you going to do with it, really?
Right.
So
Right.
that's cool that the plan is there, where it's when we had talked about it before, I was thinking of asking you that question: is how do you find these environmentally sensitive areas where people want to sell? So it seems like they've put a lot of forethought, or at least the committee that they're going to be putting together is going to have a good jump start on it.
Yes, yes, because of their backgrounds, they're very, and we have some staff members that are just awesome in the environmental lands division, and they have a number of deals that they're already pursuing, or they're in the pipeline already, I think. So, and
Cool.
basically, they'll bring them to the county commission, and we'll give the final approval on those purchases.
That's great. That's a nice headline to see. It seems like every other day you see headlines about a new development, or hey, this is something else that's coming up. And I think the conservation of more land in Martin County, and like you said, expanding that to a state
Mhm.
program, Florida Forever, would be something I think a lot of
Right,
people would get behind, just like they got behind it in Martin County.
right. Basically, the way Florida Forever works, as I understand it, is the state is willing to put those dollars into local communities that really value conservation. And what they're looking for is local support. You
Yeah,
know, that's how they gauge where to send those dollars. They want to send it to communities that appreciate conservation. So the communities that tax themselves, for instance, to buy conservational, their projects get bumped up, and there's like a ranking system for various parcels, and that bump you up in a list that they have of properties that are suitable and desirable for the program. I'll mention there's another program um, besides Florida Forever, and it's put on by the Department of Agriculture, that instead of Florida Forever is about the purchase of environmentally sensitive lands. And there's one in the Department of Agriculture that has to do with using conservation easements on property. Instead of buying the land, you go to a rancher who's been ranching for years, and his interest is in keeping his property as a ranch. And you say to him, hey, let's put a conservation easement on your property. You have the right to continue ranching, um, but we're basically buying off the development rights to the property, and that's for a sum that's usually a good fair amount less than the purchase price. But he agrees to keep it as a ranch, and that's going to be a program that we use a good bit too. That has to do with conservation easements.
yeah, that's very interesting. And so that way, that easement gets carried on. So in the future, you're not worried about that becoming somebody's next project, even when it's not going to be a
Right,
ranch. Yeah, very
right,
cool.
right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And you can stretch the dollars further because you're not having to spend as much money on the parcel, but yet you're keeping it basically in conservation without
Right.
having to
Yeah.
buy it.
See, that's interesting. Yeah, that's something I think that's really helpful for people to hear, because a lot of the more creative ways, I mean, a lot of people think, oh, great, you get a couple $100 million, you can go, buy this parcel or buy that parcel. But I could see how you could make each dollar worth a little bit more if you go about it a little bit more creatively like that.
Right. We have an example of where a parcel has already been. We've already placed a conservation easement on a very large parcel, out on the Martin Grade. It's called Bull Hammock. I think it's about a 6,000 acre ranch. And that family allowed the conservation easement to be placed on their ranch. So, it'll always be used for that purpose, and we didn't have to buy it outright.
Yeah, that's great. How does this? I'm kind of tying back into the USB, the urban services boundary, because you had mentioned wanting to touch on the septic to sewer conversions. I know that's something you wanted to touch on. How does this work? How does that work as far as the USB, and how is that affected at all by where you're looking for conservation, or is most of the conservation land going to be out west, regardless, outside of that boundary?
Yeah, well, both of the issues, Western development and also land inside the urban services boundary, and what we're trying to get done in Martin County, all kind of relates to the water quality issue and improving the water quality in our rivers, the St. Lucie River, the Indian River, and the Loxahatchee River. And that's a really good barometer of the health of your environment, right? If the water
Definitely
is clean and you've got a healthy environment, and we can improve water quality by buying conservation lands so that we can clean and store water and clean the water up before it's returned to the rivers. That's one way. Another big way that we can improve water quality is converting our old septic tanks to the sewer system. And the county put a program into place a number of years ago to remove 10,000 septic tanks in 10 years. And we're about halfway through the process, and we're right about on schedule. We have about half of them done. It's expensive. It's disruptive. We have to dig in people's yards and lay city sewer pipes, and city water lines. And usually that involves a neighborhood restoration project. While we're there, we go ahead and repave the street. It's a lot of work, but it's really necessary for water quality purposes, because it's amazing how many old neighborhoods that we have close to the rivers in Martin County, along in the coastal area on the inside the urban services boundary. They're generally older neighborhoods that are on well and septic, and many of them are close to the rivers. So stopping that and getting on city water and sewer is a critical component to improving water quality, and we're going to be prioritizing that as well.
And it seems like they've made a lot of headway there, right? I mean, I've noticed from a lot of my friends and family who, I know I have a couple family members who are on the water in Martin County, and they've made some pretty quick work in a lot of these neighborhoods, it seems. Is that correct? Or is there still a lot that, with a project like that, I'm sure it starts off as, to look at that many septic tanks, wanting to get them converted, it starts off as a big goal. Are they hitting the numbers they're hoping to hit, or how is it looking from that front?
Yeah, the goal is 10,000 tanks in 10 years, and I believe we're right at about the halfway mark, about 5,000 tanks, and we're in about the 5th or the 6th year of the process.
Okay.
A couple of recent success stories would be the Golden Gate neighborhood, which now has city water and sewer. It used to be septic tanks, and they're pretty close to the river, as you know. We just approved a project since I've been elected called Beau Rivage up there by North River Shores.
Absolutely.
I think it's like 280 houses or something like that, right on the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. And right now they all have septic and sewer. They're getting ready to have city water and city sewer. And where else? Another one that's getting ready to happen is New Monrovia in Port Salerno. And in the southern part of Port Salerno there, I think it's like 900 and something houses. We're getting ready to do that one. We secured a grant from the state of Florida to help us with that project for like $10 million or something. So that one is probably going to be approved real soon as well. So that's really exciting
Yeah.
to think about the rivers breathing a sigh of relief, because if you think about what a septic tank is, and that many of them are right on the rivers, you know what I mean?
Right.
All that water gets in the river eventually. It
Right.
runs down the road into a culvert and under the street and through a ditch, and ultimately there's a discharge point that goes right into the river.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And I think a lot of those areas, it does seem like, it is one, everything's kind of tied together when it comes to the septic tank conversion, for the water quality, to the conservation. You had mentioned getting a grant from the state of Florida for New Monrovia over there in
Mhm.
South Salerno. How does that tie in? I mean, we wanted to touch on the budget process. How does that all tie in? Do you forecast grants that you're going to get when you're looking at the budget? Or, I mean, you can kind of take that in whatever way you wanted to cover the budget process, but I think incorporating those grants and how they're factored in would be interesting as well.
Yes, a lot of the money for the big septic to sewer conversion projects comes from state grants. The Department of Environmental Protection has a program, and basically it's similar to Florida Forever and buying conservation lands. They have this big fund that goes to communities that want to prioritize this, and communities that live along rivers, and where this could do a lot for water quality. And so we're like an epicenter for that, because how many counties have three rivers running through them?
Right.
If you look
Yeah.
at a map and you think about water quality issues and where should water quality dollars be spent in our state, it's pretty easy to see how Martin County would be a place to spend those dollars.
Yeah, definitely. That's I was thinking the same thing when you had mentioned, the Loxahatchee, Indian, and St. Lucie rivers, because we could kind of be a canary in the coal mine for anybody else who's looking at ways that they can
That's a wrap for this episode of The Current by treasurecoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit treasurecoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at treasurecoast.com. Until next time, keep riding the current and enjoying everything the Treasure Coast has to offer. See you soon.